everyone, it's Doreen and Melissa, and we're here to bring you another interview with one of our friends who has a lot to teach us about theology and the Bible. And today we're going to be talking about one of Melissa's favorite topics, apologetics, and one of my favorite topics, evangelizing. So we're so glad to have Greg Koukl with us. We both have his book, Tactics. He'll be talking about his new book, The Story of Reality, coming up in this interview. So you'll want to watch the whole video because he's fascinating. Right, Melissa?
Yes. I especially, Greg, am very excited to have you on because I have been a follower of your work for a while. Your ministry has been a total asset to me and my ministry, our ministry. For those of you who don't know who Greg Koukl is, many of you have seen me recommend this book, Tactics. Well, this is Greg Koukl. He is the author of this book, and all of the good stuff that I talk about that's in this book, we're going to talk about today. And I'm especially interested because, let's start with this, Greg. There's so many things to start with, but one of the things I wanted to start with, especially because of our audience, is you had a debate one time a while ago with Deepak Chopra. Right. And I'm especially interested in this debate because Stephen Van Kars, who's a friend of ours, he posted this debate on his channel, and that's when I first saw it. And I watched it twice. And I was very fascinated with how you handled him because you were in control the whole time. And you were not mean or rude or anything like that. And you cornered him in a really loving way. And it wasn't until later that I discovered you wrote this book, and I read it, and I could see clearly in this debate how you used these tactics, these ways of talking. Can you talk about this interview?
Clarification too. I think the word tactics maybe troubles some people because it sounds military and it sounds confrontational, and I want them to think about maneuvering effectively in conversation, because that's the point. The subtitle of the book is called A Game Plan for Discussing Your Christian Convictions, and it's precisely what I provide, a game plan and a number of different maneuvers that will help people maneuver graciously in conversation. Very important part of what we do at Stand to Reason. We want to build ambassadors for Christ with knowledge, wisdom, and character is an attractive manner. So we're not looking to beat people up and embarrass them and make them look bad and get points, for our side. This isn't a gladiator thing. And that's the way many of those kinds of interviews have become nowadays, politically and whatever. It's like, who's got the fastest maneuver, put the other person down and kind of win the point. That's not how you win people. However, it does matter how you maneuver in conversation. And lots of times people pull maneuvers that are popular rhetorically that end up making the truth look bad and making something that's false look good. And so the training and tact is to help you, first of all, to spot that kind of thing, and then to maneuver in a certain way so that you can point that out, but still be nice about it. And so there's a portion of my discussion with Dr. Chopra that where this happened. And by the way, I called him, just so you know strategically how I'm approaching this interview. Deepak Chopra is a person, one of the few people on the planet who you can recognize by their first name. Yeah. Okay, so this guy has got really high Q. Big social recognition and a lot of momentum in that regard. So I don't want to call him Deepak, though many people would be, and it would be impolite because I'm playing into his brand. So I just called him Dr. Chopra the whole time. It's polite. It acknowledges his credentials and everything, but it doesn't play to his brand strength, so to speak. Plus, also made a decision that I wasn't going to try to pit Dr. Deepak Chopra against Greg Koukl, because he's known over the whole planet, and I'm just the young kid from Los Angeles, and so most people don't know me. He's got the creds, I don't, all right? So I decided, instead of pitting me against him, I decided to pit him against Jesus of Nazareth. So in other words, Dr. Chopra says this, but Jesus says this, who are you going to believe? That kind of general approach. So that's a broader strategic concern as I go into the discussion. At one point, though, Dr. Chopra came at me with a challenge. And since I'm a follower of Jesus, and Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but through me. And a whole bunch of other things like that. And all of the people who Jesus trained to follow after him said the same kinds of things. I'm going to say what Jesus said. Jesus is the only way of salvation. And indeed, there's a reason for it. It's not bigotry. There's a reason for it. And that's a reason I go into detail in the story of reality. But in any event, this is the kind of thing that gets folks on the outside from our view who disagree. It gets them really annoyed because it sounds intolerant, narrow-minded, bigoted, arrogant, all this other stuff. Okay. But let me give you the insight that I employed here in dealing with this challenge that Dr. Chopra offered me. He said it this way: so everybody who doesn't believe just like you are going to hell. That's what you're saying. Now, of course, it's a very uncharitable way to put it, because it makes it sound like anybody who, I am so arrogant about my view that I'm wishing people into hell who disagree with me, almost like that, instead of being a representative of Jesus. So the insight here is that I'm not the only person in the discussion who thinks my point of view is correct. Okay, this is really important. And this is true in every single discussion. People weigh in with an idea. They don't weigh in with an idea they think is false. Their own ideas they think are true. This is why they believe what they believe, you know.
And this is you talk about this in your book. I believe we were talking about this before we came on. It's called the suicide tactic, right?
Well, in this particular case, this challenge, what I'll show you in just a moment, this challenge is going to show how we want to show how the challenge that Deepak Chopra offered me is actually works against him just as much. You give him enough rope, he'll hang himself kind of thing. And this is a self-refuting kind of argument, commits suicide. And here's how I employed that tactic in the discussion. I said, Dr. Chopra, you're a really popular author. You have written so many books and sold so many. You probably sold, I don't know, millions. And he jumped in immediately and gave you the accurate number, 20 million, you know. And it was like, I guess his pride got his, I've actually sold 20 million. Well, of course, that didn't help him, given the point that I was just about to make. And here's the point that I made. Dr. Chopra, you don't sell 20 million books saying your view is not the correct view. In other words, Dr. Chopra, you are accusing me of being bigoted or narrow-minded or arrogant because I think my way is right, but the view you hold in contrast to me, you think that's right too. So in practical terms, his challenge to me committed suicide. His view is just as vulnerable to that, and I pointed that out. It's like when people say, don't judge, it's wrong to judge. And then I say, then why are you judging me right now if it's wrong to judge?
Yeah, I made a whole video about that. It's self-refuting. You can't.
So this, by the way, is just one of the many tactics in the book. It's just a maneuver. There's actually 3 or 4 different ways that a point of view can commit suicide. And I try to instruct Christians in that. So when they have conversations with non-Christians and the non-Christian pulls something like Dr. Chopra did on me on national TV, that they aren't caught flat-footed. They can just point out, look at you're doing the same thing. So in fact, the book that Dr. Chopra had written at the time when this film came out, and he was promoting, just like we promote, a book here in an interview, was Love is the Way. Love is the way. Yeah. I mean, oh my goodness. So in this case, then the tactical approach, understanding it, allowed me to see something that was flawed in what is otherwise a rhetorically appealing challenge to the Christian. The Christian's at a disadvantage when somebody says that. And if you know how then to turn it around and help the audience and the other person see that they are doing the very same thing that I'm doing, except for I'm the only one being called a name, right?
So say you don't know the Christian faith very well. Say you're a new Christian and you're trying to tell somebody about your beliefs.
Yes.
You know, and you're trying to tell them, oh, I believe in Jesus now, because you're very skilled. One thing that we didn't say at the beginning of the interview was your credentials. You have Stand to Reason Ministries, which is an apologetic ministry, which is a big word, which means it's defending the Christian faith. You're a thoughtful Christian. You're learning, you know, these like philosophical, theological, you know, teachings of the Bible. Your skills in apologetics and philosophy, correct?
My own degree is have a master's degree in philosophy of religion and ethics.
That's what it is.
Do a second master's degree in apologetics, and both kind of work together. But you know, you don't have to know a bunch of philosophy and theology to employ these things. It's thoughtful Christianity. It's making a case. Why do you think that this is true? Well, here are the reasons why I think it's true. You know, the more education you have, the more lucid you can be in a conversation, the more comfortable you are. And especially if you take something like the tactics book and learn how these maneuvers work and how to integrate them into the game plan, you can be much more relaxed and much more effective in making a difference with somebody, even if you don't know a lot of stuff. The more stuff you know, kind of like what you've been doing for the last years, the better it helps you to see errors. Hard to point out an error if you don't see it, okay?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, you can't use the suicide tactic unless you are aware that somebody's point of view commits suicide. But we've just given two examples. When somebody says it's wrong to judge, well, that's a judgment itself.
Yeah.
Judging you. And we also, when people say, well, you think your way is right, so therefore you're intolerant. And then my response is, do you think you're right? That's a question.
It's true. That's a really good retort. I like that.
Yeah, and it's simple. Anybody can use that. What are they going to say, Doreen? Are they going to say, no, I think all my views are wrong? Of course they think their views are right.
That's
then
true.
Why is it when I think I'm right, I'm intolerant, and when you think you're right, you're just right?
Yeah.
What am I missing here?
Well, one of the points of view that Melissa and I kind of help people over the hurdle that we used to be deluded by, or especially me, I don't know if you were, Melissa, is universalism.
That was me.
Okay, you too. So a lot of people in the New Age are offended by Jesus saying, I am the way, the truth, the life. No one gets to the Father except by me. Right. Because the belief now, and it's a worldly belief, it's not just New Age, is that all paths lead to heaven. We're all praying to the same God. Even some of the so-called Christian leaders are trying to make this pact with other religions because they say that, well,
it's progressive Christian movement.
It's real liberal, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So could you speak to universalism and what you would say to someone who's trying to argue that all paths lead to heaven?
Well, if somebody was trying to argue it, what they're going to have to do is give an argument. If they just say all paths lead to heaven, that is not an argument. That's a point of view. An argument is when you give the reasons why you think that's the case.
Well, what we see is a lot of New Agers pointing to near-death experiences that are everywhere on YouTube and books. Yeah. And so these are people who are not Christians who have this experience of going to heaven and that everything's forgiven, everything's accepted.
Okay, but what do those folks do with the multitude of NDEs, near-death experiences, in which people go to hell?
They don't watch them.
Yeah. It's a mixed bag. Right. This is called special pleading, you know. It's like the kind of points that support my argument, those are sound, but the ones that don't support my argument, we're not going to look at those, okay?
Cherry pick.
Exactly, cherry picking. Yeah, it's a more accessible term. I just want to make an observation about the New Age in general, and I'm not a specialist, but I've exposed to it quite a bit over the last 45 years as a Christian. And I do talk about this in the Story of Reality as an alternative story of reality. And there's something curious for me as a follower of Jesus about the New Age movement. There are all kinds of terms that show up in there that you find in the Bible.
Yes.
The kingdom of God that's within you, and the way, the truth, and the life, and the I am. And Jesus is quoted profusely.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, why is it a problem then? And see, this is a tactic. The tactics book I wrote 10 years ago, but I have just completed 2 weeks ago a second revised edition that has 40% more material and 6 new chapters.
Wow.
Sign me up. Take my money.
But I have a chapter on mini tactics, and one of those mini tactics I simply call "What a Friend We Have in Jesus."
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of that tactic is that you let Jesus speak for you about the things that are controversial. So if teenagers are quoting Jesus, my question is, why are you quoting Jesus? Well, because they want Jesus on their side. Jesus is someone to contend with. Okay, good. Now what I've done in that conversation is now we've established a common authority. Jesus, who we read about in the Bible, is a common authority. Now, you can't just diss the Bible now if you've just quoted Jesus from the Bible, because without the New Testament
Oh, man.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you have no Jesus to quote, New Ager. Okay, so what else did Jesus say? He said, unless you believe that I am he, you will die in your sins.
Right.
Unless you believe, he who believes is not judged. That's in John 8, the first one. This one's John 3. He who believes is not judged, but he who does not believe, the wrath of God abides on him. Yep. Now, why does the wrath of God abide in him and the belief in Jesus make a difference? It's because Jesus solved a problem that no one else solved. We have broken God's law. You know what, Doreen, Melissa, everybody knows this. This is why we feel guilty, because we are guilty. Okay. And what Jesus did is he made a trade, and he took our badness and he gives us his goodness, and our badness then goes to his account, and then he gets punished for it instead of us. That's why he's the only way. He's the only one who solved the problem. Okay, nobody else solved the problem. So notice a couple of things here. I'm just trading on something that's universal knowledge. Everybody who has ever lived, wherever they've lived, knows something's wrong with the world, and they know that the thing that's wrong with the world partially is something wrong with them. All right, we all know this. That's why we have bad self-image. Okay, and so now I'm saying that's a truth about the world that you have to make sense of. If you go off into some kind of new age fantasy, you end up denying what is obviously true. Now, what Jesus offers then is a solution to a real problem we know we have, and he paid the debt. That's why he's the only way. He's the only one who solved the problem. So when you understand how the story works, there's a reason, there's a rationale that Jesus says this, and as followers of Christ, we say the same thing. It's kind of like everybody's dying of cancer, and there's one antidote. You want the antidote? You'll get it. It's free. You don't want it? Really? All right. Well, I'm sorry, but maybe you can pretend like you don't have it, and you can play music and burn incense and have all these sensory experiences that are nice, but you're still going to die of that disease.
Yeah.
So there's a parallel there in the way it works. What I want your listeners to see, your viewers to see, is that we aren't just throwing out these annoying claims. These things fit together in a particular way for a reason, and they solve problems that we all know we have. And by the way, this information is coming from the very same Jesus they are quoting all the time because they think he's wonderful. But he is not a Hindu guru. He is a Torah observant Jew. You can't make a Hindu out of Jesus.
It's like they have this subjective view of who he is. We had the opportunity to interview Warner Wallace a while ago, and he said something, and I believe he's still closest, but he's like, I don't believe in Christianity because it's comfortable. Right. I believe it because it's true.
Exactly.
You know, and it's because it's true, then you look at it and you kind of go back from there.
Yeah,
you know,
this is the same sentiment I've expressed for decades. Sometimes Jim says it this way. I know Jim really well. And sometimes he says it this way. He says, I don't believe in Christianity because it works, because it doesn't work.
Yeah, no, it doesn't work.
And what he means is
Yes.
he's not believing it for utilitarian reasons.
Right.
Because
Yep.
he's doing something for himself, some grandiose thing. Because the fact is that the underlying claims that the world is broken, that we broke the world, that we are guilty for breaking the world, and we keep breaking it and breaking God's law. And so we need to be rescued, and God sent a rescuer whose name is Jesus.
Amen.
We don't rescue ourselves. We can't rescue ourselves. God rescues us. All of those things, Jim says, I'm believing those not because they're fun, because they're convenient, because they tickle my fancy, but because they're actually true. And I'm with him 100% on that.
Yeah, ditto. I think that that's something I can get behind, because I remember before we got on, I was telling you, Doreen, she's the heart and I'm like the mind. So it's like we make this really good team. I mean, you're mind too, and I'm kind of heart. But it's like we have we make a really good team in that aspect where there's an aspect of approaching Christianity where you have to have a logic to it, that whether you like it or not, it's still true.
Right.
And I think that just goes over the head of the New Ager, because it doesn't feel good.
Right.
And for somebody where Doreen and I came from, I know especially you, Doreen, because I came more from New Thought, where it kind of meshed Christianity together with New Age. And Doreen was, you were more into Tarot. You were more into the spiritual sides that I didn't even know that existed in this aspect of New Age. And it was all about feeling. It was all about experience. And that was your truth. And it was very subjective. It didn't even occur to me how silly that is, because you can't just have all your own individual truth. It can't be called truth if that's the way it is.
Yeah. In the story of reality, I take that on a little bit in a paragraph. I can't remember exact words, but it's something like this idea of something being your truth. What does that mean? Well, it's your belief is what you mean. But if your belief is false, then it's not a truth of any kind. It's not your truth or his truth or their truth. It's your error or your falsehood or your mistake, but it's not a truth. It's a clever way of using a term to sell a product in a persuasive way, even though the product may be faulty. Okay. So it's like you sell a lemon a car. Well, you have all these fancy words to talk about it, but then the person buys a bad product. And I think New Age, and it's not just New Age here, this is the language of the culture now. Well, this is your truth, I have my truth, he has his truth. Wait a minute. The question I ask is, the truth that you claim that you have, is it actually true? And when I say true here, I mean what Francis Schaeffer used to call true truth. Or I say in the Story of Reality book, I mean, true in the way that gravity is true. If you don't believe in gravity, you're not going to float away.
Right.
Okay. It's part of reality. And that's what truth is, discovering what reality is.
It's not depending upon us believing it to be true.
Exactly. It's mind independent. And so when people have all these various religious views, if they are not true, sooner or later that is going to come back to haunt them, because reality has a way of injuring people that don't take it seriously.
Yeah. You talked about your book, Story of Reality. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Can you hold it up?
About it. Yeah.
Yes. Can you tell us about this book? You've talked about this book a few times. Before we got on, you talked a little bit about it, but I didn't want to hear any more because I wanted to be surprised.
Yeah.
Can you talk about it? Can you tell us what this book is about?
Sure.
And why we should be excited about it?
Sure. I'd be glad to. Over half a century ago, actually more like 75 years or 7 years ago now, C.S. Lewis wrote a wonderful book called Mere Christianity. The goal was to lay out the basics of Christianity in a way that made a lot of sense, was not rife with a bunch of religious lingo that people didn't understand, and what kind of a soft apologetics or a soft defense for these ideas woven in. It's a classic. It's always been top seller even now, all these years later. But many people now think that Lewis is hard to read. And I don't think so. He actually did these on the radio And in any event, so what I wanted to do with the story of reality is to put together a book that told the story in a kind of similar way that Lewis did.
Oh, wow.
Because there's only one Lewis, and I'm not comparing myself to him. But I think there is a niche that that book filled, that we needed something now that spoke a little different language and is more accessible. And that's my goal of the story of reality, to make it easily accessible, but to give the big picture. Okay.
Oh my goodness. How have we not known about this book, Melissa?
How did we not know? I mean, because you have an Instagram, and I'm on. We're all on Instagram, and I scroll, and I don't follow many people. I follow Stand to Reason, and I think I've seen this book. There's a lot of books coming out now because Sean McDowell and J. Warner Wallace, they just came out with theirs, and they were in the middle of writing it when we interviewed them. And that's the one I've been kind of seeing. But this one, I don't know how I missed it.
Well, now we know that we're getting it.
Yeah. When did this come out?
It came out in the beginning of 2018. Actually, it broke in the fall of 2017, but it was released in 2018, and that's why it picked up. Or maybe it was 2016 or 2017. And now
that makes sense, because I didn't get on Instagram till late last year.
That's right.
Yeah.
I should look at the.
Regardless, Melissa and I will be ordering it today.
Well, yeah. Also, I mentioned this before, and I'm a little uncomfortable kind of waving this flag, but it's just a way to show that lots of people have really liked this book. It has close to 300 reviews on Amazon right now. The average is 4.8.
Nice.
So everybody really liked this book. And actually, many people compared it to Mere Christianity in terms of its tone and accessibility and the material it covers. And plus, last year it won the Book of the Year award for Christianity Today, and the Gospel Coalition both gave it Book of the Year in its category of apologetics and evangelism.
That's amazing, because I read Christianity Today, so
I think it
just went over my head.
The audience that you have, a lot of maybe tire kickers or younger Christians, or just trying to get the picture of what it's all about. I think that's wonderful. This is right for them. The subtitle is How the World Began, How the World Ends, and Everything Important that Happens in Between.
So it's the gospel.
Yes, but you can't get the gospel right unless you get the beginning right.
Yep.
And so there's 5 sections, and follow these categories: God, man, Jesus, cross, resurrection.
Wow.
That's the final resurrection to reward and judgment. So in other words, it starts with God. God made everything. It all belongs to him. He made human beings to be in friendship with him. He made human beings like him in a very special way that allows them to be in friendship with him. But then human beings got themselves in a mess of trouble. And so God initiates a rescue plan. So you got God and man so far. He initiates a rescue plan. And notice in our story, God rescues man. Man does not rescue himself. I think I said that already, but I want to emphasize that. Man can't rescue himself. He becomes a man in the person of Jesus, who does something on the cross that determines what happens to everybody at the final resurrection. God, man, Jesus, cross, resurrection. How the world began, how it ends, and everything important that happens.
You're an organized guy, Greg. I love it.
Well, it's easy. You know what? If you get those 5 words, and many of your viewers already have them: God, man, Jesus, cross, resurrection. It's the plot line. It's the order of the story. I mean, it's simple, but it represents now an outline you can have in your mind to explain how the Christian worldview fits together. And by the way, if you don't understand how the whole thing fits together, you will not be able to respond to the challenge of the problem of evil, and you will not be able to respond to the challenge of religious pluralism, universalism, why Jesus is the only way. When you see how the story fits together, you realize that the problem of evil and Jesus being the only way are 2 sides of the same coin. Our entire book is about the problem of evil. It starts in the 3rd chapter and doesn't get resolved until 66 books later. All about solving the problem of evil. And singular problems often have singular solutions. The singular problem is the problem of evil. The singular solution is God becoming man to rescue mankind from his own evil and the world.
I wondered if we could segue into talking about evangelizing.
Sure.
For people who are watching who, like myself, I came out of a New Age family. I was raised Christian Science. I live with my mother, who's still a Christian Scientist. I'm not doing very well in evangelizing to her.
No,
She is reading the whole Bible, though, at my encouragement.
There's nothing Christian or scientific.
No.
Christian Science.
No, but this is how I was raised, is that Christian Science, Mary Baker Eddy has the answer for everything. And it's interesting, Melissa's family had Christian Science influences also. Anyway, so Christian Science and the New Age, a lot have kind of, it's why I went into the New Age, is Christian Science denies that there's any sin, and denies that we're broken, denies that the world's broken. It denies that God's law even exists, let alone on our heart. And so it's just this big defense system that says that I'm perfect, whole, and complete.
Doreen, let me ask you a question about, is it kin to Vedantic Hinduism that basically says the world is, the physical world is, material world is an illusion?
Right, yeah, exactly that.
Yeah. So let me lay a predicate for answering your question about how evangelism works, because in Tactics, I've expanded this section for the new expanded and revised release of Tactics 2 in the fall. So there's a lot on this point, but I encourage Christians to approach evangelism in a different way that I learned it in the Jesus movement when I became a Christian. And a whole lot of people still look at it this way. We approach evangelism in harvest mode. That is, we're going to tell people about Jesus, and we are hoping they're going to change their minds and pray with us to receive Christ. Okay. Now that happened a lot in the Jesus movement. Nowadays, it don't happen like that so fast. Okay. And what we're missing is a truism that is very simple, but it has profound implications for evangelism. And the truism is this: before there can be any harvest, there always has to be a season of gardening. Okay, let's just think of it that way. Gardening leads to harvesting. You garden well, you get a good harvest, okay? If we are thinking all of harvesting and challenging people to think about receiving Christ, there's a whole lot of folks that are going to sit on the bench because that scares them, okay? So we've got a lot of players that are out of play. When I look at my life and what God has used me for in the last 46 years or whatever it's been, I realize I'm a gardener. I don't lead many people to Christ. But I will tell you this, Warner Wallace, who you mentioned,
yes,
Jim Wallace listened to our radio show when he was still an atheist.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Jim Wallace was in my garden. Abdu Murray, who's speaking at our Rethink Student Apologetics Conference in Birmingham next weekend, the last weekend of April. Abdu Murray, who's a converted Muslim, listened to our radio show when he was still a Muslim. So Abdu Murray, who is now the North American director of Rabbi Zechariah, RZIM, Rabbi Zechariah's International Ministries, he was in my garden. And there's a whole host of other people that have said that. But what happened is somebody came into my garden and harvested my fruit. Get out of my garden, No, I don't care about that. Jesus said in John chapter 4 that there is a season of sowing and a season of reaping, and the one who sows and the one who reaps rejoice together.
Right.
We're all on the same team. So here's the application. They can read the John 4 for this conversation Jesus has after the woman at the well. It's really in this regard. The application here is, my suspicion is that most Christians are not harvesters. Most Christians are gardeners. Okay. And so instead of trying to close the deal or thinking of that as the goal in spiritual conversations, I think we should be thinking more about just doing a little gardening. And the way that I characterize that in the story of in the book on Tactics, is by putting a stone
in their shoe.
Oh, you've said that, Melissa.
Yeah. I love this. This is my favorite, one of my favorite tactics in your books.
University of Alaska in Anchorage last week, and I spoke to a group at the university, and this is what I told them. I said, I'm not here to convert you tonight. I just want to put a stone in your shoe.
Yeah.
Wow.
I just want to annoy you in a good way. That's what I told them.
Give them something that they can't ignore. And I love that, because you're not trying to convert them on the spot. You're trying to give them something to think about.
Exactly.
And that's really, I call it seed planting. Before I read your book, I called it like your little seed planters. Just go and I
Well,
like the stone in the shoe.
That is a biblical metaphor. And
Yeah.
one of my editors, 10 years ago, when the tactics book went to the editors, one of the ladies who was an editor said, this stone in the shoe, I think you should call it plant a seed.
Really?
Yeah. And I said to her, I don't want to plant a seed.
I
want
want
to put a stone in their shoe. So, and by
I'm
the
really
way,
glad. I'm glad you stuck with it.
It has a much more rich and vivid and aggressive sense to it.
Yes.
And I want to annoy people in a good way. That's what I tell them.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Annoy people in a good way. I love it.
So I
think
remember.
about it. If Christianity is worth thinking about, which is what our conviction is, and we give them something worth thinking about, well, then we've done our job. So I have lowered my bar, and in lowering my own expectations for any conversation, I'm hoping, I know, because so many have told me, a whole bunch of folk are getting off of the bench and into play because they don't feel like they've got to get people to sign on the dotted line. Okay.
Yes, people get so overwhelmed. They think that, and this is why I'm really glad that we're interviewing you. And I made a whole video because this is one of our commonly asked questions. I'm like, A, you need to buy this book. B, don't think that you're going to be converting them overnight. Like, it doesn't work that way. Whenever I get these emails, I think that there's just this massive stress that people feel whenever they think, oh, I need to convert them to Christ. And it just doesn't work that way. So I'm so glad we're talking about this now, because this is one of my favorite parts in your book.
It does motivate people. I hear it all the time. One woman came up to me after I taught this, and she said, I have been set free, something a lot. And many, many people, in fact, the most common response I get from the tactics book is, this book changed my life. I mean, that's the thing people say over and over and over again. I'm not surprised either, because the concepts changed my life and my ability to evangelize in a more effective way as well. Now, I want to clarify something here, because what I've offered is a perspective called garden. And it is controversial. I'm glad you guys like the notion, but occasionally there are people that don't like that. They get mad at me because I think I'm letting people off the hook. And
Christians, right?
Pardon me?
There are Christians that get upset about it.
Yes, Christians, because of the advantage that invariably Christians who get upset are harvest types. They're harvest.
So you're still following the Great Commission and preaching the gospel.
Yes.
You're just not making everyone have an altar call, right?
Yes, that's right. And also, just to clarify, when you say preaching the gospel, I'm construing that as a very, very broad kind of thing.
Right.
You think of Jesus, he wasn't giving the good news every time he spoke. He wasn't giving the whole story every time. Lots of times he just gave the bad news and he walked away, because he wanted the bad news. Look at Sermon on the Mount, you're perfect as my heavenly Father is. Oh, you didn't commit adultery? Don't even think about it. You think about it, you're done for. Okay. Oh, you didn't commit murder? Did you get mad at your brother without cause? Did you call him a fool? Okay, you're out.
Yep.
Oh man, that's rough. Okay,
have fun sleeping tonight.
This is why we need a savior.
Yeah, that's right. That's his point. We need that. So sometimes you're dealing with particular parts. It depends what the Lord provides you in the moment. So, I'm just letting you know, there are different people have different points of view, and that's fine. Okay. I'm speaking to the people who are gardeners, and we probably need a whole lot more gardeners than we need harvesters, because when the fruit is ripe, it falls into the basket pretty easily.
Well, one of the things that happened for me is I was touring for 25 years as a New Age teacher, and not in my whole life. I was 58 before I heard the gospel. No, not one person. I had Christians angry with me who would kind of throw scripture at me, but never in context. I just knew they were angry, which put me off of Christianity, actually. And I didn't have one person garden or try to harvest me.
Yeah.
And so it's one of the reasons that Melissa and I are just spending so much time trying to help people who are in apostate religions, or, agnostic, atheist, New Agers, whatever, to hear the gospel.
Well, you have a lot of listeners that have open ears, from what I can understand, and are trying to figure things out. And so this is why dropping a receive Christ and you'll receive eternal life kind of line on them doesn't make any sense to them.
No, it makes no sense.
No sense.
They don't know they need a savior.
Yeah, you got to give them the broader context. If you do a little here, and Melissa does a little there, and I do a little here, and other people do a little blah blah blah. This is all things God is sovereignly using in an individual's life, and bringing them forward. And if I can move somebody forward a little bit, it's fine. But I need to add something else here. Is that what I have just talked about? A general approach. I have something, and you both have it now too with the book, that most Christians don't have. I got a game plan. I have a step-by-step way of accomplishing the end of doing some gardening with the hope that God will use it in that person's life just a little bit and move them closer to him. And that's what the book outlines. And I'll just give you the first step for a lot of people. It will really set them at ease. When you are in an encounter with somebody where you hope it will have some spiritual impact, all I want you to do first off, out of the gate, not worrying about anything else. Don't worry about the end game. Don't worry about how, whether that person's come to the Christ. Don't even worry at that point about giving the gospel. Here's what you have to think about: gathering information.
That's what you do, Melissa.
Yep. I'm telling you, Greg is one of my I'm such a big advocate for this.
Wisdom is an artful method, and that's the tactical maneuvering. So here I mean gathering information in a little different way. Let's just say
from them, right? Getting their side.
You're sitting next to me on the airplane. Hi, Melissa. Hey, what's happening? So we talk a little bit. Now, I may want to have a spiritual impact on you. What do I know about you?
Yeah.
Nothing at all. We're going to the same destination. That's all. I don't know if you're going home or you're going. So I'm going to make small talk for you. I'm going to find out something about you in a very friendly way, not a pressured way. If I see an opening or an opportunity or something to get into some kind of spiritual thing, like maybe you're reading a New Age book. I said, what are you reading? Okay, well, I'm reading this.
We're laughing because of the books Melissa used to read.
My library right now. This is Eckhart Tolle, okay?
Eckhart Tolle.
That was Melissa's favorite.
So there you go. I got Eckhart Tolle. So I'd ask you, well, what's the book about? And then you say, well, I'm, and you give a summary. I said, is that your convictions? Is that what you think are you invested in this? So now what am I doing? And I'm filing away. I'm getting a lay of the land for you, okay?
Yeah.
And then what I might say is, does that book ever quote Jesus?
Yes, it does a lot.
Why does Eckhart Tolle quote Jesus? Okay, so innocent question. He's going to tell me because Jesus is cool. He knows if the thing is all right. Now what I've done is that was a tactical maneuver. What a friend we have at Jesus. I'm getting him to make a commitment to Jesus as an authority. Now I can leverage that. All right, and so you just in that little role play, you can see how drawing him out in a friendly way, very relaxed, no lines drawn in the sand, nobody defending turf or dukes aren't up, but I am getting such valuable information and creating a communion between the two of us by interest in you, in this illustration, and now I've got some more maneuvers in my game plan that I can begin using. Notice that I'm always asking
questions.
That is the absolute key to the game plan. And there are 3 different ways in the game plan that you can use questions, and one of them is to gather information. Okay? Another one is to exploit a weakness or a flaw. And we gave an illustration of that earlier when I said, well, the person calls me intolerant because I think I'm right. And I said, well, do you think you're right? Well, yes, I do. Well, then why is it when you think you're right, when I think I'm right, I'm intolerant, but when you think you're right, you're just right. Notice I see a flaw. It's a suicide situation, but I'm using a question to throw the ball back in their court. Instead of making a statement like, well, you're doing what I'm doing. By using a question, there's a huge tactical advantage. And when the ball's in that person's court, they've got to answer. And what are they going to say?
It's interesting to me because you have a degree in philosophy, and I don't know if you're familiar with this method, the Socratic method.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah, okay, because what's that?
it's hard to miss Socrates if you have a
Yes.
degree in philosophy. But you're
That's,
right.
I mean,
Ancient method. Jesus used it all the time.
yes. And so, and yeah, this is in your book. This is totally in your book.
I don't use Socrates as my example, though. I use...
No, you don't. That's what it sounds like.
But I use Lieutenant Columbo.
I wanted to ask you about this. If you can, this is my favorite tactic in your whole book, is the Columbo tactic. I used to watch this all the time as a kid with my dad, and I loved that show, and so it kind of resonated to me that you use that as a metaphor. Yeah. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the Columbo tactic and why it's kind of key and pivotal to whenever you're witnessing to somebody?
So the book is in 2 sections. The first section is essentially the game plan, and the second one is finding the flaw. And suicide is an example of finding the flaw. But the game plan is built on this tactic using questions that I call the Columbo tactic, after Lieutenant Columbo from about 4 decades ago now in TV. He's the #1 most recognized TV icon of all time. And he comes into the crime scene, and he's unassuming seeming, and he's scratching his head and muttering to himself, and he's got this trench coat on, he's got this cigar, and actually when I do this before an audience, I put my trench coat on, I get the cigar. And there's something about this thing that bothers me, can I ask you a question? And so he's unassuming, he's not threatening, he doesn't look like he can think his way out of a wet paper bag. He's stupid, but he's stupid at the box. And so this is the manner then is something that we can adopt just to be genial and friendly and relaxed, and just, do you mind if I ask you some questions? Now, these are not idle questions for Lieutenant Columbo, and they're not idle for us, but they are offered in a non-aggressive, unassuming way, because he doesn't want to blow his cover, so to speak. He's just checking things out. But as he's able to get the information, he now has more material to move forward on. And that's kind of the concept here. First step, we gather information about the individual and their circumstances, okay? If they're making a point against Christianity, like saying, well, everything's relative. Jesus isn't the only way. All roads lead to Rome. So I'm going to ask this question. What do you mean by that? That's a model question. So I say, you mean all religions? What can you explain to me what you mean? I want them to articulate that point as clearly as they possibly can, okay? And a lot of people aren't going to be able to articulate it clearly because they never thought about it.
Yeah.
And so this is going to force them to think about the view they actually hold. But when they're done, now I have another question, and I hinted at this earlier in our conversation. I want to reverse the burden of proof. In other words, if they make a claim, they have a responsibility to give reasons for the claim. That's the difference between just making an assertion and defending it with reasons and giving an argument. Remember I said earlier, that's not an argument, that's just a point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Reasons for it. So this is the second step. If they make an assertion, well, all roads lead to Rome. What do you mean by that? Clarify, blah, blah, blah. Okay, now I get it. So why would you think that's the case? Why would you think that all roads lead to Rome? Why would you say that? So now that's reversing the burden of proof. Now I'm asking them for their reasons for the view that they just gave. And I don't know what they're going to say. I know what some people have said, but I don't know what they're going to say. Well, all religions are basically the same. Really? In what way? That's another question about like clarification. What do you mean by that? Because religions aren't the same. They're vastly different. This is why they're religions. They're not all basically the same. And so anyway, these are, notice the first, I'm just gathering information. Second, if they give their point of view, I want clarification of the view, but now I want reasons why they think the view is a good one. Okay. Now I'll tell you a secret. What happens, ladies, in this kind of situation? When you ask people what they mean by that or how they came to that conclusion, that's the first 2 steps of the game plan. Notice they're just questions, all very easy for the Christian. No burden on them. They don't have to defend anything. They're just being a student. A lot of times you'll get what I call, and this is 60s alert here, okay, because these are my days. I was born in 1950. I was a teenager in the 60s. You're going to get what you call a Simon and Garfunkel response. Mm-hmm. Those guys wrote a song in 1966 called "The Sounds of silence.
Silence, right.
So when you ask somebody, well, really, explain that to me. What do you mean by all roads lead to Rome? Or we ask, well, why would you think that they do lead to Rome?
Mm-hmm.
There, notice that silence? That's what you get. Silence.
Crickets.
You get, they have never thought about these things. And there's a dynamic in play here that you are very familiar with, but you might not have thought about it like this before.
Mm-hmm.
People repeat what they've heard, not what they've thought through.
Yeah. I so wish that I could have sat next to you on one of the many airplanes that I was on. And I just want to make that point for anyone who's watching, that I just want to emphasize, if you could emphasize this, Greg, is that when you're evangelizing to people and you're using these tactics, you're coming from a place of, you really care about their eternal destiny and their soul. You're not judging them in any way.
Yeah, the whole purpose of this is to invite them to consider an alternative without bringing along a bunch of baggage that in the way that we've learned to do this, in the language that we've used, baggage of not taking their view seriously, that's going to interfere with the process. You know, Jesus asked lots of questions. Sometimes he asks the questions to be clever. Whose picture is on this coin? Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Okay, but other times he said, look, at the rich young ruler said, what can I do to be saved? Essentially, and Jesus said, well, what does the law say? Mm-hmm. So he made the rich young ruler repeat.
Right.
He didn't give the whole thing, you know, and there was a problem here because he was wealthy, and so there was this coveting thing that he left out, whatever. But notice how Jesus is drawing more information out of that person and encouraging self-discovery. When we approach it in that way, and this, by the way, takes practice. I'm a much more better with this on this with strangers than I am with my daughters, for example.
That's what I was going to say. My family's still New Age, and it's so hard to even bring up this topic with them because, you know,
right.
The threat is that they'll never talk with you again, and it's very threatening. And interestingly, we interviewed Ray Comfort, who's a very famous evangelist, and he said his own brother won't talk with him.
Yeah.
And so it's much easier, you're right, to evangelize or witness to people who you don't know.
Sure.
I guess the threat is not
he
as
has a
much.
different style than I do. We're going to be actually doing some video work next month together. You know.
Oh, are you with Ray?
Yeah, and Kirk lives down the street, down the road from me. You know, so
no, that's great.
Good guys, and they're doing really good work. But he is more aggressive. He is more in harvest mode.
He wants to.
Yes, he is.
That's right. Yeah. You know, God bless him. Just like Josh, God bless them both. I'm glad they're on our team. We need harvesters, but we also need gardeners. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, so this approach, I think, gives people that aren't as aggressive and maybe aren't as well trained, gives them some tools to actually do some gardening, to make a difference in the kingdom, so that harvesters can harvest more.
Nice. And also that you don't get false conversions too, right? Isn't that a big problem with just altar calls, is people in the moment, they say, oh, I pledged my life to Jesus. And then that wears away in 2 days.
Yeah, Ray said once to me, he said, you know, sometimes people want me to do an altar call and get decisions. And we got to get somebody to decide for Christ. And he said, you want decisions? Oh, decisions are easy to get. And we just manipulate a little here and a little there, we can get decisions. He said, I don't want decisions. I want conversions.
Yeah.
Difference between the two.
This is amazing. I could sit here and talk to you all day.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm enjoying it too. So time is going by.
You're fun and easy guy to talk to, Greg. This has been great. Our hour blew by and I'm bummed, but maybe we can get you back on after your revised. Yes.
Right over Thanksgiving. Tactics 2 will be released, revised and expanded, 40% more material. I thought I was just going to gloss it up a little bit. Man, when I got into it, there were so many things I'd learned in the last 10 years that I wanted to put in there, and it took me a lot longer than I thought, and I'm way behind my deadline, but we still got the release date that we're going to work with, and 6 new chapters. I have a chapter on mini tactics. I have a whole new tactic called Inside Out that I explain there. On the mini tactics, I have What a Friend We Have in Jesus, for example, and Move Toward the Objection, and there's a bunch of little ones that'll be helpful there. And I also warn against, I have one called Watch Your Language, and the idea there is to avoid religious lingo like the plague when you're talking with people, and I've had some suggestions about
Love that.
Well, we do get a lot of pushback on that in our witnessing work from people who are put off by the church scandals and such, and so they just want to throw the baby out with the bathwater because their church experiences have been bad, and then they read about, one of these scandals.
Right.
So what would you tell us to say to people like that?
There's one mini tactic that I just mentioned. It's called moving towards the objection. And that is, instead of trying to rebut the objection, you embrace it. Okay. So somebody says something like, well, the church is filled with hypocrites. Mm-hmm. My response is, yeah, actually, they're filled with a lot worse sinners than that. They're filled with egotists. They're filled with, and down the line, liars and corrupt people. That's why they need Jesus.
Yeah.
To get forgiven and to have their lives transformed. Notice how I moved towards the objection. I embraced it and diffused it. Okay. And yeah, there are going to be just unconscionable things that you see in church settings, but it's a good reason why none of your viewers should ever judge Christianity by Christians, because we are fallen, fallible human beings. And make no pretense to being otherwise. This doesn't justify evil in our lives. It's just a reality check. We judge Christianity by Christ and Christ alone.
Amen.
It's about a relationship with Jesus, not a religion.
It's follow Jesus, not as followers. I want to end with this, is that one thing I think it's important that Greg, is that your writing style, for people that are watching, usually whenever you read a book, sometimes authors can be long-winded or they can be kind of hard to follow. There's a flow to your writing style that I dig. It's well written, it's concise. So for anybody who's kind of afraid maybe to read a new book, this one is not. It's not an easy read, but it's not a difficult read at the same time. It's
rich stuff, but I did try. I worked really hard on the euphony, the flow, all of that. And by the way,
I've noticed.
The last time I heard somebody say I dig it was 1967, and so I'm very touched to hear that. I love that. I think you're digging it is really groovy. Okay.
Nice.
Far out.
Well, that's it.
Oh my goodness.
Were your parents hippies or something? Tell me about it.
My mom was a New Ager, so there's that.
Yeah. Well, the 60s when New Age got its launch.
Yeah, it did.
When TM, Transcendental Meditation, came to the States, and the Beatles were responsible for really launching that enterprise. But then they wrote a song making fun of Maharishi Mahesh Yoga, and the song was called "A Fool on the Hill."
Did not know that.
I didn't either. I thought they were avid followers of them.
He was. Then they got disappointed, and so they wrote "A Fool on the Hill."
Oh, interesting.
Very popular.
We just
people didn't listen closely to the lyrics, like
apparently.
But anyway,
we interviewed Wally Larson. He was into transcendental meditation, and he's on Dorian's channel. So if anybody wants to watch that, you can watch his. Thank you, Greg. We appreciate having you on. I know that your time is valuable, but this was a blast. This was awesome, and I want to thank you for coming on.
That's another word from the 60s, a blast.
A blast, that's right.
In the Midwest. I'm from Chicago originally, so love it. It's just a joy talking to both of you ladies. By the way, I do 2 hours of live broadcasting every week. That means people can call in to the show. They can get the information at our website, str.org. But I do some commentary for the first 20 minutes, and then I just answer questions. And a lot of times I'm getting challengers that give me the questions, atheists or whatever. And what I do is I try to role model the tactical approach.
Wow.
So if you're familiar with the book and then you listen to the show, that you'll be thinking, oh, that's a suicide tech. Oh, wait a minute, that's steamroller. He's getting steamrollered and he's handling that guy's steamrolling. Oh, it works, that kind of thing.
Oh, that's great.
2 1/2-hour shows or 25-minute shows called #STRask. And if you go to Twitter and go #STRask and put a question in, then these are questions that we will answer from the sheet, basically. And Amy Hall, one of our bloggers, and myself, we do the show together. So basically, it's 3 hours a week of podcasting.
Wow.
Only 1 LA commute.
Nice.
So
That's amazing.
Right? So I really encourage people to sign up for that. They can go to str.org or possibly to iTunes and look up Stand to Reason, and they can sign up for that. It's delivered, obviously, right to your device, and you can listen to it at your leisure. You can even listen to it live if you want to by downloading our app, our Stand to Reason app on your phone, and then you can listen to it there. But most people just get the podcast and listen to it. And then if they want to give a call, they just call in during showtime, which is Tuesdays from 4 until 6 Pacific time. So thanks for giving me a chance to mention those shows.
What an amazing opportunity people have to call in or send through Twitter questions to you. So that's wonderful. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
We want you would be willing to close out our video today, Greg, with a prayer. And we sure appreciate you being here and your time. And we know you're so busy. And what you've taught us is so amazing. And of course, we want everyone to read Tactics and the Story of Reality.
There you go.
And we'd love to have you back on the show when Tactics 2 comes out also.
Yeah,
for more insights.
I'm on. Just contact, one of my staffers who you talked with earlier, and I'm there. This is loads of fun for me, just absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm so happy to not only have had an influence in your life, but to see the way you are paying it forward in such brilliant ways. That's the most important thing for me. When people take what I have done or anybody else at Stand to Reason, str.org, by the way.
Yeah.
And then they pay it forward. That means more to me than anything else. So thank you for your hard work in that regard. Let me pray for you and for your listeners. Father, what a lot of fun this has been with Doreen and Melissa. And thank you for the magnificent platforms that you have given them, how they have taken the transformation that you have brought in their lives, and they are paying that forward into the lives of so many thousands more, Father. I pray that you will continue to bear fruit through them, and that fruit will remain. I pray for the people that are listening here, Lord, people who have not entered into a friendship with you, made possible because of what your Son did for us. I pray, Lord, that I have annoyed them in a good way, that we put stones in their shoes, that we've got them thinking. I pray, Father, for those who are right on the cusp, that something that was said here, that by your Spirit will push them over into your kingdom, and you will rescue them from the domain of darkness, transfer them to the kingdom of your beloved Son, in whom there's forgiveness of sin and redemption. And for those young and older followers of Jesus, I ask that you will take the concepts that we discussed here and that Doreen and Melissa talk about on this program, and invest it deeply in their hearts, so they will go forward, if not as harvesters, as effective gardeners, so that the one who gardens and the one who harvests can rejoice together for your glory, Father, and for your kingdom's sake. Amen.